Chapter 20. The Old School Building. That night, Ohama came to the Hondas to bid farewell. All of them were in a sentimental mood. Even grandmother, who had hated her so much, sat up till late to talk with her. Shunsuke and Otami urged her to stay a night or two. Grandmother also said, "Please stay with us tonight. I feel so sorry for Jiro. The New Year's Day is around the corner. Why don't you stay here till then?" Her kindness wouldn't last until the following day, Ohama thought, but she felt much easier and decided to take advantage of their kindness for just one night. Jiro and Ohama shared the bed, but each of them could not go to sleep very easily. Again and again they held each other tight in the cold bed. When he awoke the next morning, Ohama had already gone. He sprang up and ran about all over the house. Remembering that she had brought a furoshiki, a square wrapping cloth, he looked for it but could not find it anywhere. He was utterly confused but would not ask anybody about her. He just moved about in a large house as if he were in search of some very precious thing he had long cherished and lost. Everybody saw him running this way and that, but did not dare to speak to him. As soon as breakfast was over, he rushed outside. He called together his playmates and began the usual game of soldiers with them, but couldn't get interested in it very much. Even when he shouted an order to go on, he just kept standing alone absent-mindedly. "Why, it's not interesting," said one of the boys. "Let's go to the new school." The other boys agreed to this and were about to leave when Jiro cried, "Onward!" and started leading his party in a brisk mood. All the boys expected him to go to the new school, but surprisingly, Jiro took the other way. He was leading them towards the old school. His playmates stopped and protested against him, but Jiro told them to follow him. The parade broke up, bringing about a noisy complaint among them. They said in chorus that they didn't want to play at such an old place, but Jiro insisted that it would be much more interesting to play freely in that empty building. At last he said to them, "All right, I'll go by myself. Goodbye." The other boys followed him reluctantly. Playing in the old school building, however, turned out very interesting. They could run about wildly all over the large empty building. They were delighted with the loud echoes of the floorboards they stamped on. They stuck sticks into the broken parts in the plastered walls and pried them with all their strength. Big lumps of plaster dropped off with a thud, which made them imagine that a bomb had exploded. They tore some floorboards off with much effort to make a space for the trench, into which they brought in a lot of small stones to use as bullets. When their bullets hit against the walls, they gave off a loud cry with excitement. It was very different from their usual play in the graveyard or in the shrine. One thrilling sight after another appeared before their eyes. All the boys were really excited, but Jiro was not. The more cheerful they were, the more melancholy he became. Soon he regretted to have suggested that game to his playmates. When the other boys were throwing the stone bullets frantically, Jiro slipped away into the keeper's room. He took his seat where Ohama had been sitting the previous day. Sometimes the bullets came rolling to the room next to the keeper's. Whenever the stones made a rattling sound, He felt an acute pain in the stomach, as if he had been stabbed with a knife or something. This room shan't be destroyed by them, he said to himself. He imagined himself fighting against them to guard the room. He was really in a heroic mood. A loud war cry was heard, and stamping footsteps arose in the corridor. It sounded as if the charge had just started. Then a boy cried, "Why, I don't see Jiro-chan." "Oh yes, what's the matter with him?" said another. "Was he killed in the battle?" "What a fool you are! Probably he went for some more stones for bullets." "Maybe so." "Jiro-chan," they called, but he did not answer. Holding his breath, Jiro concealed himself under the floor of the keeper's room. At last they crowded into the very room where he was hiding, noisily talking to each other. "He isn't in here either," a boy said. "He's really fooling us. I won't play with him anymore." "I won't either. He isn't hurt, I hope." "I doubt that." "Let's go home," some boy said. "This isn't any fun." "Go home? You're kidding," said another. "Let's go to the new school." "Fine, let's go," said some other boy. "Maybe Jiro-chan has gone already." All the boys ran off. Jiro came out and wandered around the devastated schoolhouse with a pale face. When his feet hit against the stones, it made a chilling sound as if the bones in a charnel pot were touching each other. Then wintry sunlight streamed in through the rents in the wall, making him feel sad. Jiro was very sorry that his nurse was no more with him. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Chapter 21. The Cornerstone. One day, a crumpled postcard was delivered to the Hondas from Ohama. It was written that they had safely arrived at the mining town. About 10 days after New Year's Day, Jiro received a New Year's card from Otsuru, but no more tidings since then. The card from Otsuru was a gaudy one in which you could see the rising sun and an evergreen pine tree. Jiro kept it in his school bag as his most precious thing. In due course, the school year changed. Jiro proceeded to the 4th grade. The woody smell of the new school building grew thinner, and his memory of the Ohamas was also flagging. Soon the old schoolhouse was broken down, but its cornerstones had long been left, revealing their discolored surface among the weeds. Jiro often visited there by himself on his way back and looked at the old stones with nostalgic sentiment. One day he sat on a cornerstone and took out his precious card from Otsuru. He did not notice that some boys had come up behind him. "What are you doing here, Jiro-chan?" said one of them. He was very surprised and hastily pushed the card into his bag and turned to them. "What in the world are you doing?" said another boy with a serious look. "Can you move this stone?" he said to him abruptly. It was his gift to think of such excuses on the spot. Once he made it, he recovered his presence of mind. "All right, let me do it first," said the boy and put his hands to it, but it would not move an inch. All the other boys joined in the work, heaving it to and fro with shouts. Before long, there was a gap around it, where a thin, pale-colored root of a grass was seen shining in the sun. It looked like a fine silk thread, put in water and beaten flat. Jiro watched them working with an uneasy feeling, as if his cherished treasure were being destroyed mercilessly. "Stop it," he cried. "Isn't it natural for the stone to move if you do it together like this?" "What? Must we do it all alone, Jiro-chan?" They said in surprise and let it go. "Of course," he said. "I tried it by myself." "All right, let me try again," said the boy who had put his hands on it first. He made efforts to shake it, but it was too heavy for him. "Stop, it won't move after all," said Jiro, and started for home with his bag on his shoulder. The other boys also left there, grumbling because Jiro would not turn back. The cornerstones were cleared away in early summer, and the school ground was turned into rice paddies. It was quite impossible to tell where the schoolhouse had been. The New Year card from Otsuru had been kept for a long time, but as time went by, it became stained with his fingers and ceased to attract his attention anymore. It had been taken out of his bag before he knew it. In this way, his memories of Ohama faded out, making him settle down to his own world. However, it never failed to affect his character in some way that the very world to which he had long been attached so deeply was taken away from him. A vacant space had formed in his mind, as if the trees had been rooted out of the river bank. The cavity sometimes made him feel dreary for no apparent reason. He did play at soldiers and other games with his friends, but they were not interesting enough to fill his empty heart. He was sometimes absorbed in thought and was learning to resign himself to the world, which made him more gloomy in character. In the midst of those changes in his mind, Jiro was to meet with the death of some of his relatives. In June, his aunt at the Masakis died. September saw the death of Tetsuo, his cousin, and in November his own grandfather passed away. When his aunt breathed her last in the daytime, her eyes were wide open and her skin was as pale as a wax doll, which he could not forget for long. Tetsuo passed away quite unexpectedly. His looks did not change very much, but Jiro was deeply moved by his death because he was the same age as himself and was his best friend at the Masakis. The death of his own grandfather, however, stirred him most profoundly.